My father raised his champagne glass at his 70th birthday party, the crystal catching the light from the massive chandelier above. 200 guests fell silent as Preston Harwick commanded the room with the same authority he'd wielded over his business empire for 40 years. He looked directly at me, and I knew something terrible was coming. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue this celebration, I have an announcement about my legacy," he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of cruelty I'd known since childhood. "As you know, I'm retiring from Harwick Industries, and it's time to pass the torch to the next generation." The room buzzed with anticipation. My brothers, Roderick and Sterling, straightened their shoulders, already savoring their triumph. They stood near the grand staircase like princes awaiting their coronation, their wives glittering with diamonds beside them. "To my eldest son, Roderick," my father continued, gesturing toward my brother who stepped forward with a practiced smile, "I leave the manufacturing division, the estates in Connecticut and Palm Beach, the yacht fleet, and $18 million in liquid assets. You've earned every penny by standing beside me for 15 years. Applause erupted. Roderick raised his own glass, his smile widening as board members and investors nodded their approval. His wife, Camilla, kissed his cheek for the cameras that were documenting this grand moment. "To Sterling, my second son," Preston's voice boomed with pride, "goes the European operations, our international holdings, the Manhattan penthouse, the art collection valued at $12 million and another $18 million in cash. Your vision for global expansion has proven invaluable." More applause. Sterling gave a mock bow, soaking in the admiration while his wife whispered something in his ear that made him grin even wider. I stood in the back corner, my stomach turning to lead, knowing what was coming but hoping I was wrong. "And now," my father said, his voice changing, becoming sharper, colder, "we come to my youngest son, Deacon." Every eye in the room turned to find me. I felt their stares like needles, some curious, others already glinting with the anticipation of blood in the water. Preston walked closer to where I stood, each step deliberate, theatrical. Deacon, who rejected the family business to play doctor to barn animals. Deacon, who threw away every opportunity I gave him to chase some childish dream of saving strays and livestock. He paused, savoring the moment. Deacon, who chose poverty over prosperity, sentiment over success. The room had gone completely silent. Even the waitstaff had frozen in place, silver trays balanced perfectly still. "To you, Deacon, I leave exactly what you've contributed to this family's legacy." He raised his glass higher. "Nothing, not a single penny, not a property, not even a seat on the board you rejected 10 years ago. You were never worthy of the Harwick name, and tonight, everyone here bears witness to that truth." The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, then another. Then the entire room erupted in applause, as if they'd just witnessed a brilliant performance. My father's business partners laughed openly. My brothers clinked their glasses together in celebration. Even my Aunt Meredith, who'd always been kind to me at family gatherings, looked away when I caught her eye. "A toast," Preston called out, his voice triumphant, "to those who build legacies and to those who learn the price of walking away from greatness." "To legacies," the crowd roared back, champagne glasses rising in unison. I turned and walked toward the door, my legs steady despite the earthquake in my chest. Behind me, I heard Roderick's voice carrying over the celebration. "Should have listened to Dad, little brother. Hope those mutts keep you warm at night." Then, Sterling's laughter. "At least he's consistent, always choosing the losing side." The marble floor of the entrance hall echoed under my feet. My hand reached for the massive oak door when I heard someone calling my name. Not shouting, just speaking urgently, quietly. "Deacon, wait, please, just one moment." I turned to see Walter Grimsby, my family's lawyer for the past 40 years. His face looked different from the crowd inside, marked with something I couldn't quite place. Sympathy? Guilt? He glanced over his shoulder to make sure we were alone, then reached into his jacket pocket. "Your mother, Vivian," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She knew this day would come. She prepared for it 20 years ago before she died." He pulled out a manila envelope, thick with documents, sealed with burgundy wax bearing my mother's initials, VBH, Vivian Brennan Harwick. My hands felt numb as he pressed it into them. "She made me swear on my life, Deacon, on my life and my children's lives, that I would give this to you tonight, on your father's 70th birthday. Not a day before, not a day after. Tonight?" His weathered hands trembled slightly. "I've carried this burden for 20 years, and now it's yours." "Walter, what is this?" "The truth," he said simply. "Everything your mother wanted you to know when the time was right, when you could handle it, when you would need it most." He squeezed my shoulder, his eyes filled with an old sadness. "Don't open it here. Go somewhere safe. And Deacon, whatever you decide to do after you read it, know that your mother loved you more than life itself." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back toward the party, leaving me standing in the doorway holding an envelope that suddenly felt as heavy as the world. Through the windows, I could see my father laughing with his guests, my brothers posing for photos with their wives, everyone celebrating the destruction of my place in the family. My mother had been dead for 20 years, taken by cancer when I was just 12 years old. She'd been the only person in that mansion who'd ever shown me genuine love, who'd encouraged my dreams of becoming a veterinarian, who told me that kindness was a strength, not a weakness. Now, 2 decades after her death, she was reaching out from beyond the grave on the very night my father had publicly disowned me. I walked to my truck, the envelope burning in my hands. The sound of laughter and music from the party followed me into the night. As I sat in the driver's seat, I could see the warm glow of the mansion's windows, could imagine my brothers already planning how to spend their millions while my father basked in his final victory over the son who dared to choose his own path. But I had something they didn't know about, a message from the only parent who'd ever truly loved me. My fingers traced the wax seal, feeling the indentation of my mother's initials, and I wondered what truth could possibly matter after 20 years of silence. The first line of her letter would change everything, but in that moment, sitting in the dark outside my father's mansion, I was just a rejected son, holding the last words of a mother I'd barely had time to know. 3 weeks before that nightmare of a birthday party, I was performing emergency surgery on a golden retriever who'd been hit by a truck. The dog's owner, a single mother named Janet, sat in my waiting room with her 2 kids, crying because she couldn't afford the full procedure. I told her we'd work out a payment plan, maybe $20 a month, whatever she could manage. That's who I am. That's the life I chose, and despite what my father thinks, I've never regretted it for a second. My veterinary clinic sits on 5 acres just outside Denver, Colorado, about as far from my family's Connecticut estate as I could get without leaving the country. I bought the property 6 years ago using the small trust fund my mother had set up for me before she died. It wasn't much, maybe $70,000, but it was enough for a down payment. Everything else I built myself, one patient at a time, one 16-hour day after another. The morning the invitation arrived, I was castrating a stallion at the Morrison Ranch. My assistant, Beth, drove out to the field waving an envelope like it was on fire. "This just came by courier," she said. "Guy in a suit driving a Mercedes. Said he had to deliver it personally." The envelope was everything my father represented. Expensive, ostentatious, and cold. Ivory cardstock so thick you could cut yourself on it. His initials embossed in gold, the kind of thing that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Inside, the message was brief and commanding. "Your presence is required at Preston Harwick's 70th birthday celebration. Black tie, no exceptions. Family duty demands attendance." Family duty? I almost laughed at that. Where was family duty when I graduated from veterinary school and my father refused to attend because I was wasting my potential? Where was it when I opened my clinic and he told everyone at the country club that I was mentally unstable? Where was it when my mother died and he shipped me off to boarding school 3 days after her funeral? "You going?" Beth asked, reading my face like she always did. "Haven't spoken to him in 3 years," I said, turning back to the stallion. Last time was at Roderick's wedding when he introduced me to his business partners as the family disappointment. But something made me hold on to that invitation. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that small, pathetic part of me that still hoped my father might finally see value in what I'd become. Or maybe it was something else, some instinct inherited from my mother that told me this particular summons was different. I grew up in that Connecticut mansion with its 23 rooms and perfectly manicured gardens. Every corner held a memory, mostly bad. The dining room, where my father would quiz us on stock prices during dinner, punishing wrong answers with silence that could last for days. The study, where he'd lecture me for hours about my failures while Roderick and Sterling sat smirking in their perfectly pressed suits. The library, where my mother would sneak me books about animals, whispering that it was okay to dream of a different life. My brothers had taken to the family business like sharks to blood. Roderick, 6 years older than me, had started shadowing our father at board meetings when he was 14. Sterling, 3 years my senior, had his first insider trading scheme figured out by his senior year of high school, though my father made sure it never touched him legally. They were Preston Harwick's true sons, molded in his image, ruthless, calculating, and completely devoted to the altar of money. Then there was me, the kid who brought home injured birds and tried to heal them in shoeboxes. the teenager who volunteered at animal shelters instead of attending father's country club gatherings. The son who announced at his high school graduation that he was going to become a veterinarian, not a corporate executive, had watched his father's face turn from red to purple to a kind of gray I'd never seen before. "You're killing your mother's memory," he'd said that night. "She would be ashamed of what you're becoming." But he was wrong. My mother, Vivian, had been the one who encouraged my love for animals. She'd take me to the zoo every weekend when my father was traveling for business. She'd help me build little hospitals for my stuffed animals, complete with tiny surgical instruments made from paper clips and rubber bands. On her deathbed, when the cancer had taken almost everything but her voice, she'd held my hand and whispered, "Follow your heart, Deacon. It knows the way better than any map your father could draw." She died 2 days later. I was 12 years old, and the only person in that massive house who'd ever shown me unconditional love was gone. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hollow condolences. My father gave a speech about legacy and strength, never once mentioning love. My brothers stood stoically, already learning that Harwick men don't cry. But I sobbed until I couldn't breathe, and my father's look of disgust is burned into my memory forever. After the burial, he sent me to Exeter Academy, a boarding school where troubled rich kids got hidden away. I spent 6 years there, coming home only for mandatory holidays where I'd sit at the dinner table like a ghost while my family discussed acquisitions and mergers. The day I turned 18, I took my mother's trust fund and never looked back. Now, all these years later, that invitation sat on my desk between patient files and prescription pads. I had built something my father could never understand, a life measured in saved animals and grateful families rather than profit margins. My clinic had become known throughout Colorado for taking cases other vets wouldn't touch, for never turning away an animal in need, regardless of the owner's ability to pay. But that invitation kept calling to me. Some part of me, maybe the 12-year-old boy who'd lost his mother, needed to face that house again. Needed to see my father one more time and show him that his definition of failure wasn't the only one that mattered. So I made the decision that would change everything. I called Beth, told her to clear my schedule for a long weekend, and booked a flight to Connecticut. I even bought a tuxedo, the first formal wear I'd owned since high school. As I packed, I found myself wondering what my mother would think of the man I'd become. I hoped she would be proud. I hoped she would understand that choosing compassion over wealth was its own kind of success. The night before the flight, I performed one last surgery, removing a tumor from a 10-year-old lab whose family had driven 3 hours to see me. As I worked, carefully, methodically, saving a life with my own hands, I thought about the party waiting for me, about the father who saw this work as beneath a Harwick, about the brothers who would mock my choices. I had no idea that my mother had been planning for that night for 20 years. I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about my family was built on lies. All I knew was that I was about to walk back into the house that had tried to break me, wearing a rented confidence and carrying the weight of every choice that had led me away from my father's world and towards something he could never understand. A life built on healing instead of harming, on service instead of supremacy. The boy who'd left that mansion was returning as a man who saved lives for a living. I thought that would be enough. I thought wrong. The party was everything I expected and worse. The Harwick mansion had been transformed into what looked like a coronation hall. Gold and silver draping hung from every archway. Ice sculptures of my father's company logos stood like frozen monuments to his ego, and a string quartet played in the corner while waiters in white gloves circulated with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. I arrived deliberately late, hoping to slip in unnoticed, but the moment I walked through those massive doors, heads turned. The prodigal disappointment had returned. Conversations paused mid-sentence, as familiar faces registered my presence with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement to outright disdain. "Deacon," my Aunt Meredith approached first, air-kissing my cheeks while keeping her distance, as if poverty might be contagious. "We weren't sure you'd actually come. Your father said you were probably too busy with your little animal practice." "It's not little," I said quietly. "We perform over 3,000 procedures a year." She laughed, that tinkling society laugh that meant nothing. "How charming. Well, your brothers are by the bar. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to see you." Thrilled wasn't the word I'd use. Roderick spotted me first, his eyes narrowing over his whiskey tumbler. He nudged Sterling, who turned with a smile that belonged on a shark. They approached together, a unified front in their matching designer tuxedos, their wives trailing behind like expensive accessories. "Well, well," Roderick said, looking me up and down. "Did you rent that tux by the hour? It looks like it. Good to see you too, Rod, I replied, refusing to take the bait. Sterling circled me like I was livestock at auction. Jesus, Deacon, you smell like a kennel. Did you at least shower after playing with the dogs? I showered after saving a horse's life this morning, I said. But I guess that's not as impressive as insider trading, right, Sterling? His face darkened. Watch your mouth, little brother. You're in our world now. Our world? I looked around at the preening peacocks of a high society. This stopped being my world the day Mom died. Don't you dare mention her, Roderick snapped, stepping closer. You have no right. You abandoned this family. You spit on everything she and Dad built together. She didn't build this, I said firmly. She tolerated it. There's a difference. Before either could respond, the lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the grand staircase. My father appeared at the top, resplendent in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. The crowd applauded as he descended, every step measured for maximum impact. This was Preston Harwick's stage, and we were all just props in his performance. He worked the room first, shaking hands with senators and CEOs, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, accepting congratulations for a life built on stepping on others. When he finally reached me, his smile disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. Deacon, he said, the word sounding like something bitter in his mouth. I see you managed to find something appropriate to wear. Hello, Dad. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not love, not even hate. Disgust, pure, undiluted disgust for the son who'd chosen a different path. Mingle if you must, he said, but don't embarrass me. These are important people, not the kind of trash you usually associate with. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in a sea of people who all seemed to know exactly how little I mattered to the great Preston Harwick. I grabbed a champagne glass from a passing tray and found a corner where I could observe without being observed. That's when I noticed the setup at the far end of the ballroom. A podium with a microphone, clearly prepared for speeches. The dinner was excruciating. I was seated at a table with distant relatives who spent the entire meal discussing their portfolios and vacation homes while pointedly not asking me anything about my life. Every few minutes, I'd catch someone at another table gesturing toward me, whispering behind their hands. The black sheep on display. Then came the moment everything changed. The music stopped, the lights focused on the podium, and my father took the microphone. The room fell silent with anticipation. This was what they'd all come for. Preston Harwick's grand announcement about his legacy. Friends, family, esteemed colleagues, he began, his voice carrying that commanding tone that had crushed competitors and employees alike for decades. Tonight marks not just my 70th birthday, but the beginning of a new chapter for Harwick Industries. The crowd murmured excitedly. Roderick and Sterling moved closer to the stage, their wives clutching their arms, already counting their millions. As many of you know, I've spent my life building an empire from nothing. From a single factory in Bridgeport to operations spanning 3 continents, Harwick Industries stands as a testament to what ambition and discipline can achieve. Applause thundered through the room. My father basked in it, letting it wash over him like a benediction. But empires are not built to die with their founders, he continued. They are built to endure, to grow, to evolve under new leadership. Tonight, I announce my retirement and the division of everything I've created. This was it, the moment my brothers had been training for their entire lives, the moment I'd stopped caring about years ago, or at least told myself I had. To my eldest son, Roderick, whose strategic mind and ruthless dedication have proven invaluable, I leave the manufacturing division, including all facilities in North America, the estates in Connecticut and Palm Beach, my collection of yachts and $18 million in liquid assets. The room exploded in applause. Roderick stepped forward, raising his glass to his father, his face glowing with triumph. Camilla posed beside him as photographers captured the moment, the heir apparent claiming his throne. To Sterling, my second son, whose vision for international expansion has exceeded all expectations, I leave our European operations, the Asian partnerships, the Manhattan penthouse, the art collection appraised at $12 million, and another $18 million in liquid assets. More applause, even louder than before. Sterling took his bow, that shark smile wider than ever. His wife, Natasha, actually curtsied, as if she'd just been crowned princess of something that mattered. Then my father's eyes found me in my corner. The room seemed to hold its breath. And now I must address my youngest son, Deacon. Every head turned toward me. The weight of 200 stares pressed down like a physical force. I set down my champagne glass and stood straighter, preparing for impact. Deacon, who was given every opportunity, every advantage, every chance to be part of something magnificent. Deacon, who chose instead to waste his education, his potential, his very birthright on a profession barely worthy of being called a profession. The words hit like punches, each one precisely aimed, but I'd been hit before. I could take it. While his brothers built their futures alongside me, Deacon ran away to play doctor to animals. While they learned to command boardrooms, he learned to shovel manure. While they became men of consequence, he became nothing. Someone gasped. Several people laughed. My brothers stood side by side, united in their victory, watching my humiliation with undisguised pleasure. Therefore, my father said, his voice rising to fill every corner of the room, to Deacon, I leave exactly what he has contributed to this family's legacy. Nothing, not a single penny, not a property, not even a token to remember me by. He chose to be nothing to this family, so nothing is what he receives. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, starting from the table where my father's business partners sat, applause began. Slow at first, then building to a crescendo that shook the chandeliers. People were actually giving him a standing ovation for disowning me. "You were never worthy," my father said into the microphone, looking directly at me. "Never worthy of the Harwick name, never worthy of your mother's memory, never worthy of being my son." The crowd roared its approval. Champagne glasses raised in toast to my father's brutal honesty, to his strength in cutting out the weakness in his family tree. I saw people I'd known since childhood laughing openly at my disgrace. Even the waitstaff seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. That's when I knew I had to leave. Not run, not flee, but walk out with whatever dignity I could salvage from this public execution. I moved toward the door, my footsteps steady despite the earthquake in my chest, ignoring the whispers and laughter that followed in my wake. I sat in my truck in the mansion's circular driveway, my hands trembling as I held the envelope Walter Grimsby had pressed into my palm. The wax seal bearing my mother's initials seemed to pulse under the overhead light. Through the mansion's windows I could still see the party continuing, shadows of people dancing and laughing, celebrating my erasure from the family legacy. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, the kind my mother had always used for important correspondence. Her handwriting, still elegant after 20 years, made my throat close up. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Deacon, if you're reading this, your father has just shown his true nature to the world, and you need to know the truth about why I really died." I had to read that line 3 times before it sank in. My mother had predicted this exact moment, this exact betrayal, 20 years ago. How was that possible? I didn't die from cancer, my love. The cancer was real, but it was induced. I was poisoned, slowly, methodically, by someone who wanted me gone. That someone was your father. My hands went numb. I nearly dropped the letter, but forced myself to keep reading. 6 months before my diagnosis, I discovered something about Preston that changed everything. Your grandfather, my father Theodore Brennan, wasn't just Preston's business partner. He was the actual inventor of every patent that launched Harwick Industries. Your father stole them, forged documents to claim ownership, then destroyed your grandfather financially and emotionally. My father died of a heart attack when you were 3, but it was really a broken heart from the betrayal. I remembered my grandfather vaguely, a kind man with soft hands who'd let me play with his pocket watch. My father had told us he was weak, a failure who couldn't handle the pressure of business. Another lie in an empire built on them. I confronted Preston with the evidence I'd found in your grandfather's old files, bank records, original patent drawings with my father's signature, even correspondence discussing the inventions before Preston claimed them. I told him I was going to expose him. That was my mistake. I should have just taken you boys and run, but I thought I could make him face justice. The letter continued, detailing how her mysterious illness began just weeks after that confrontation. How the doctors couldn't explain the aggressive nature of her cancer or why treatment seemed to make her worse. How Preston had insisted on a specific oncologist, Dr. Martin Hewitt, who'd retired to Switzerland immediately after her death. I started recording our conversations when I realized what was happening. Preston would bring me special teas, insisting they would help with the nausea. He'd stand there and watch me drink every drop. In one recording, he told me, "You should have kept quiet, Vivian. Some truths are too expensive to tell." My mother had spent her final months not just dying, but building a case. She'd hidden evidence in a safety deposit box at Union Federal Bank, box number 1247. She'd transferred the original, patent rights, which she'd inherited from her father without Preston knowing, into a secret trust. The patents themselves expired years ago, but the derivative technologies are still in use. Every smartphone component manufactured by Harwick Industries, every medical device, every aerospace instrument, they all stem from my father's original work, The royalties should have been yours all along. I've made sure they were collected in a trust under your name through my maiden name, Brennan." She went on to explain how she'd structured everything through Walter Grimsby, making him promise to wait until Preston's 70th birthday, knowing that would be when he'd formally disown me and I'd need this information most. There's approximately $100 million in the account now, possibly more. But the money isn't the real gift, my darling boy. The truth is, inside the safety deposit box, you'll find everything. The original patents, the forged documents Preston created, recordings of our conversations, and video testimony I made from my hospital bed that Walter witnessed and notarized. I looked back at the mansion, at the warm light spilling from its windows. Inside that house, my father was celebrating his victory over me while standing on the bones of the man he'd destroyed and the wife he'd murdered. You have a choice now, Deacon. You can take the money and disappear, live your life free from the Harwick shadow, or you can use what I've left you to destroy him the way he destroyed so many others. I won't tell you what to choose. I trust your heart, just as I always have. The letter's final section was more personal, more painful to read. I need you to know that every time you showed kindness to an animal, every time you chose compassion over profit, you honored my father's memory and my love for you. Your brothers became Preston's sons, but you remained mine. That's why I chose you for this. Not because you're the youngest or the weakest, as Preston believes, but because you're the only one with enough integrity to handle the truth without becoming corrupted by it. She'd included specific instructions. Contact Walter immediately. Go to the bank first thing Monday morning. Inside the box, there would be a USB drive with digitized recordings and a contact at the FBI who'd been waiting 20 years for her call that never came. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you more than life itself. Know that every moment I had with you was worth whatever price I paid, and know that your father's cruelty toward you isn't because you're worthless, but because you remind him of the one person he could never truly defeat, me. The letter was signed simply, "All my love, forever, Mom." Underneath her signature was a postscript. The recording of February 15th, 2004 is particularly important. Preston discusses the acceleration protocol with Dr. Hewitt. Make sure the authorities hear that one. I called Walter's cell phone. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. "You read it," he said. It wasn't a question. "Is it true, all of it?" "Every word. I've been carrying this burden for 20 years, Deacon. Your mother made me executor of her shadow estate, the one Preston never knew existed. I have the key to the safety deposit box. We can go Monday morning when the bank opens." "Walter, did you know he was killing her?" There was a long pause. I suspected, but I had no proof until she gave me those recordings. By then, she made me promise to wait. She said if I acted too soon, Preston would destroy you boys too. She died protecting you. I started my truck, the engine's rumble drowning out the distant music from the party. Monday morning, 9 a.m., Union Federal Bank. Deacon, you should know that once you open that box, there's no going back. Your mother documented everything meticulously. The FBI will have to act. Your father will be arrested. The company will collapse. Your brothers will lose everything. I thought about Roderick's smirk as I left the party, Sterling's laughter, my father's voice saying I was never worthy. "Good," I said. "Let it all burn." I drove away from the mansion, leaving behind the world that had rejected me, carrying the ghost of my mother's love and the weapon she'd forged from truth. Monday would bring reckoning. Sunday night, I had to decide exactly how to use the power she'd left me. The boy who'd entered that party hoping for acceptance was gone. In his place sat a man with proof of murder and the means for justice. My mother had been playing a long game, one that spanned decades and reached beyond death itself. Now, it was my turn to make the final move. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, fitting weather for resurrection and revenge. Walter met me at Union Federal Bank precisely at 9, carrying a briefcase and wearing the same expression priests probably wear before performing last rites. The bank manager, a woman named Patricia Chen, had been notified by Walter to expect us. She led us to a private viewing room in the vault basement, her heels clicking against marble floors like a countdown. Box 1247 was larger than I'd expected, one of the old-fashioned ones that required 2 keys. Walter produced his, I signed the authentication papers, and Patricia left us alone with 20 years of secrets. Inside, my mother had organized everything with the same meticulous care she'd once used to arrange family photographs. Labeled folders, chronological recordings on a USB drive, original documents in protective sleeves. The first folder contained the original patents, my grandfather Theodore Brennan's actual handwriting describing innovations that would eventually generate billions. Paper-clipped to each patent was Preston's forged version, the signatures obviously different when you saw them side by side. My mother had also included bank records showing Preston had paid a forger named Marcus Webb $30,000 just days before filing the false patents. The USB drive contained 43 audio recordings. I plugged it into Walter's laptop and selected February 15, 2004, the one my mother had specifically mentioned. My father's voice filled the room, casual and cold. The current dosage isn't working fast enough, Martin. Every day she lives is another day she might talk. I need you to increase the thallium, not enough to trigger an autopsy, but enough to accelerate things. Dr. Hewitt's nervous voice responded, Preston, this is already beyond what we discussed. The ethics board would have my license. The ethics board will never know. She has cancer, Martin. People with cancer die. Just make it happen faster. Another 2 weeks maximum. I have that merger with Keltec coming up, and I can't have her disrupting it with her accusations. My stomach turned. Walter had to pause the recording while I stepped outside to compose myself. When I returned, we continued through the evidence. Video testimony of my mother, gaunt and dying but fierce with determination, detailing everything she'd discovered. Financial records showing the offshore account she'd established in my name under Brennan, containing royalties from companies still using the stolen patent derivatives. The current balance was $137 million. Your mother was brilliant, Walter said softly. She used her maiden name and her father's old lawyers in Canada. Preston never knew the patents had derivative claims that survived expiration. Every major manufacturer who licensed improvements on the original designs has been paying royalties to the Brennan Trust for 20 years. We spent 3 hours documenting everything, making copies, organizing the evidence into a prosecutable case. Walter had maintained contact with FBI agent Diana Morse, who tried to investigate Preston years ago, but could never find sufficient evidence. One phone call from Walter, and she agreed to meet us immediately. The meeting with Agent Morse took place in a federal building downtown. She reviewed the evidence with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting for this moment her entire career. This is it, she said after 2 hours. This is enough for murder charges, fraud, patent theft, conspiracy. Preston Harwick is finished. She wanted to move immediately, but I had a different idea. His retirement party. He's signing over the companies to my brothers this Friday at the Harwick Industries headquarters. Every investor, board member, and media outlet will be there. Agent Morse smiled slowly. You want it public? I want everyone who applauded his cruelty to watch him fall. Friday arrived like thunder. The Harwick Industries headquarters had been transformed into a celebration venue, with Preston planning to sign the transfer documents on stage before 500 witnesses. I arrived with Walter, Agent Morse, and 6 other federal agents. Security tried to stop us, but FBI badges have a way of opening doors. The main hall was packed. Preston stood on stage with Roderick and Sterling, all 3 in their perfect suits, preparing to sign the documents that would transfer the empire. The crowd was filled with the same faces from the birthday party, plus reporters from major financial publications. I walked down the center aisle. Preston saw me first, his face shifting from annoyance to confusion as he noticed the federal agents behind me. The crowd began murmuring, cameras turning our way. Deacon? Roderick spoke into the microphone. What the hell are you doing here? I climbed the stairs to the stage, Walter and Agent Morse flanking me. The entire room had gone silent, hundreds of people holding their breath. Before you sign those papers, Dad, I said, my voice carrying without the microphone, your investors should know that Harwick Industries is built entirely on stolen technology. Preston laughed, that dismissive bark I'd heard my whole life. You pathetic creature, you're so desperate for attention you'd interrupt my retirement with fantasies. Not fantasies, facts. I turned to address the audience directly. Every patent that launched this company was stolen from Theodore Brennan, my grandfather. I have the original documents, the forgeries, and the bank records showing Preston Harwick paid for false patents. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Preston's face had gone from red to white. You're delusional, he snarled. Your grandfather was a failure who couldn't handle business. My grandfather was a genius whose work you stole. But that's not even the worst part. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the venue's sound system. This is a recording from February 15th, 2004. Preston's voice filled the hall, discussing the acceleration protocol with Dr. Hewitt, telling him to increase the poison. The crowd gasped as they listened to him casually plan his wife's murder. Several people covered their mouths in horror. Cameras captured everything. That's fabricated, Preston shouted, but his voice cracked. That's not real. Agent Morse stepped forward, badge raised. Preston Harwick, you're under arrest for murder, fraud, conspiracy, and patent theft. You have the right to remain silent. The federal agents moved toward him. Preston looked at Roderick and Sterling, who stood frozen, their inherited empire crumbling in real time. Then he looked at me with pure hatred. You destroyed everything, he hissed as they cuffed him. No, I replied calmly. You destroyed everything when you killed her. I'm just returning the favor. As they led him away, the crowd exploded into chaos. Reporters screaming questions, investors demanding answers, board members fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Roderick grabbed my arm. Do you realize what you've done? You've ruined us, the company, our money, everything. Everything. Built on murder and theft, I said, pulling free. It was never really yours. Sterling stood there, his shark smile finally gone, replaced with the look of someone watching their world end. The houses, the accounts, they'll freeze everything. They will, Walter confirmed. Every asset derived from the stolen patents will be seized pending investigation. I walked off that stage, leaving my brothers in ruins, my father in custody, and an empire in ashes. The crowd parted as I passed, some with horror, others with something like respect. Outside, Agent Morse was directing Preston into a federal vehicle while news vans arrived in swarms. Your mother would be proud, Walter said beside me. I thought about her letter, about the choice she'd given me. I could have taken the money and vanished, but that would have left her murder unpunished, her father's legacy stolen. Instead, I'd chosen justice over comfort, truth over family, exactly as she'd known I would. Mr. Harwick, a reporter shoved a microphone at me. How does it feel to destroy your own father? I looked directly into the camera, knowing this would play on every network by evening. He was never my father. Fathers don't murder mothers. He was just Preston Harwick, and now everyone knows exactly what that means. The federal vehicle pulled away with Preston in the back, his empire collapsing behind him like a house of cards in a hurricane. My brothers would survive, but they'd never again be the princes of anything. The investors would sue, the prosecutors would convict, and the name Harwick would become synonymous with betrayal. I'd entered that building as the disowned son, the family disappointment, the unworthy one. I left as the only Harwick who'd chosen truth over treasure, the only one my mother had trusted with her final gambit. The boy, who'd been publicly humiliated at his father's birthday party, had become the man who brought down an empire with nothing but evidence and courage. Justice, I learned that day, is the best inheritance of all. 6 months after Preston Harwick's arrest, I stood in the main treatment room of the Vivian Brennan Memorial Animal Hospital, the largest veterinary trauma center in the western United States. The morning sun streamed through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, illuminating surgical suites equipped with technology most human hospitals would envy. This wasn't just a clinic anymore. It was a testament to what could be built with truth instead of lies. The trial had been swift and merciless. Preston Harwick, the man who'd spent 70 years crushing others beneath his ambition, sat in a federal courtroom as recording after recording played his own voice condemning him. The prosecution presented my mother's video testimony, filmed days before her death, describing how her tea tasted stranger each day, how Preston watched her drink it with cold satisfaction. Dr. Martin Hewitt, granted immunity for his testimony, confirmed every detail of the poisoning protocol. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts, life without parole. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row where Preston could see me. He never looked my way, not once. Even when they led him away in shackles, he kept his eyes forward, still too proud to acknowledge the son who'd brought him down. Roderick and Sterling sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, their designer suits replaced with off-the-rack department store specials. They'd lost everything when the assets were frozen. The houses, the yachts, the bank accounts, all seized by federal authorities. 3 weeks after the verdict, Roderick showed up at my clinic in Denver. He looked different without his $3,000 suits and $100 haircuts. Just a man in jeans and a jacket, standing in my parking lot like he didn't know how he'd gotten there. I need a job, he said without preamble. Any job. I'll clean kennels, answer phones, whatever you have. I studied my oldest brother, this man who'd spent his entire life believing he was superior to me. Why here? Why me? Because you're the only one who actually built something real, he admitted, the words clearly costing him. Everything I had was stolen. I see that now. I need to learn how to earn something honestly. I hired him as a receptionist. He was terrible at first, his arrogance making him snap at clients who didn't move fast enough for his liking. But gradually, something changed. Maybe it was seeing animals in pain and the people who loved them enough to spend their savings on treatment. Maybe it was watching me work 18-hour days not for money, but because a family's golden retriever needed emergency surgery. Whatever it was, Roderick began to soften. 6 months later, he was my office manager, and for the first time in our lives, we were actually brothers. Sterling took a different path. He fled to Europe, trying to trade on the Harwick name until he realized it had become toxic. Last I heard, he was teaching English in Prague, living in a studio apartment, learning what it meant to survive on merit rather than manipulation. He sent me a letter once, just 2 lines. "You were right, I'm sorry." I never replied, but I kept the letter. The Brennan Trust, my mother's secret legacy, had grown to nearly $150 million by the time I gained access. I could have kept it all, lived like the brothers who'd mocked me for choosing poverty. Instead, I used it to build something my mother would have loved. The hospital took $60 million. Another 30 went to establishing the Theodore Brennan Foundation, providing free veterinary care to families who couldn't afford it. The rest I kept invested, using the returns to fund ongoing operations. Walter Grimsby visited the hospital's grand opening, walking through the state-of-the-art facilities with tears in his eyes. "Vivian would be so proud," he said, watching me perform a demonstration surgery for veterinary students. "You didn't just avenge her, you honored her." "She knew exactly what she was doing," I replied, remembering her letter. "She didn't just leave me evidence, she left me a choice. I could have taken the money and disappeared, lived quietly somewhere Preston could never hurt me again. But she knew I wouldn't. She knew I'd choose justice." "How did she know?" Walter asked. I pointed to a plaque on the wall, my mother's favorite quote engraved in brass. "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching." Below it, in smaller letters, Vivian Brennan Harwick, 1954-2004, forever loved. "Because she raised me," I said simply. And she knew that no amount of money could corrupt what she'd taught me. A year after the hospital opened, I received a letter from Preston in federal prison. His handwriting was shaky, the words brief. "Your mother won." That was all. No apology, no acknowledgement of his crimes. Just those 3 words. I framed the letter and hung it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that victory isn't always about what you gain. Sometimes it's about what you refuse to lose. The morning I'm telling you this story, I performed surgery on a police dog shot in the line of duty. The officer, a tough-looking sergeant named Rodriguez, cried when I told him his partner would make a full recovery. He tried to pay, but I showed him the Foundation's policy. Service animals are always treated free. As he thanked me through tears, I thought about my father's birthday party, about the room full of people who'd applauded my humiliation. None of them would understand why this moment, this officer's gratitude, was worth more than any inheritance Preston could have left me. But my mother would have understood. She'd known that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch, the wrongs you right, the love you leave behind. I run the largest animal trauma center in 5 states now. We treat over 10,000 animals a year, half of them at reduced cost or free. Veterinary students come from across the country to train here, learning not just medicine but compassion. The walls are covered with photos from grateful families, their pets alive because we exist. This is my empire, built on healing instead of harming, funded by justice instead of theft. Preston Harwick sits in a cell, his legacy destroyed. His name, a cautionary tale about the price of cruelty. My brothers learned, too late, that inherited wealth is worthless when it's built on blood. But I learned something else, something my mother made sure I'd understand, even if it took 20 years to discover it. The greatest inheritance isn't money or property or power. It's the truth that sets you free and the courage to use it. My mother knew she was dying, knew Preston would escape justice if she acted too soon. So she played the long game, trusted her youngest son to eventually stand where I'm standing now, surrounded by life and purpose instead of greed and emptiness. Every morning when I walk into this hospital, I see her name above the door. Every life we save, every family we help, every student we inspire to choose service over selfishness, it's all part of her plan. She didn't just expose Preston's crimes, she ensured that everything he stole would be transformed into something that would save lives for generations. That's the real revenge, the perfect justice. Preston spent his life taking from others, and now his victim's son spends every day giving back. He built an empire on death, and I built a hospital on the truth about that death. He died inside a federal prison, but my mother lives on in every animal we save, every family we help, every moment of grace we create from his disgrace. If you're watching this video and you've ever been told you're not worthy, that you don't matter, that choosing kindness over cruelty makes you weak, remember this: the very qualities that made my father reject me were the ones that made my mother trust me with her final secret. The compassion he saw as weakness became the strength that brought him down. The integrity he mocked as stupidity became the foundation of something he could never build or buy or steal, something real and lasting and good. Your worth isn't determined by those who reject you, but by what you choose to build despite that rejection. Your inheritance isn't what others leave you, but what you create from the truth of who you are. My name is Deacon Harwick, and I'm the son Preston Harwick said was worth nothing. Today, I'm worth $150 million, but more importantly, I'm worth the thousands of animals I've saved, the students I've taught, the brother I've forgiven, and the mother I've honored. That's my inheritance, my legacy, my truth. And it all started with a sealed envelope and a mother's perfect, patient love. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced rejection from those who should have loved you most, I want you to know that your worth isn't diminished by their blindness. Like this video if it touched your heart. Share it with someone who needs to hear that choosing integrity over inheritance is always the right choice. Comment below with your own story of overcoming family rejection or finding your worth beyond others' opinions. And subscribe to this channel for more stories about justice, redemption, and the unexpected ways truth finds its way to light. Remember, sometimes the greatest gift isn't what you're given, but what you're strong enough to uncover.